Howdy, everybody. Glad to see you all here with us. You've tuned in once again to Cyberhuman Frontiers. And last week we had a little bit of fun with what if this, what if that? And we talked about some things. I may do a little bit more of that tonight. But we are going to go further, approximately where we left off last week. And we're going to get into a little bit more about voice-to-skull technology. First, our usual announcements. We'll get those out of the way. This is our standard community guidelines disclaimer. This video does not claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. We offer it solely for your entertainment. The points of view and purpose here is not to incite fear, violence, or anything along that line, but to share opinions and thoughts with other like-minded individuals who are curious. The opinions on this stream belong solely to the persons expressing them and are not a representation of the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers. From time to time, this channel and in general, our videos may contain certain copyrighted works that are not specifically authorized, but which we believe in good faith are protected by federal law and the fair use doctrine for one or more of the reasons noted in the Copyright Act of 1976. So, just a little bit of recap. By the way, before we forget, the featured science fiction suggested movie of the week is called The Final Program. And that is a kind of a futuristic movie in which a trio of scientists plan to create a self-replicating, immortal hermaphrodite using the final, quote unquote, the final program developed by a dead Nobel Prize-winning scientist. And in case anyone didn't know what a hermaphrodite is, that is from the old Greek, Hermes and Aphrodite, the male and the female figures. A hermaphrodite is an organism which has both the male and female characteristics and can reproduce by itself. So watch that at your own interest and at your own discretion, as we suggest always. And we suggest that you engage with the content and the links that we provide here. At your own interest and at your own discretion, and go further. Follow, a lot of the links that we put in here have additional hyperlinks embedded into them, and you can go from one thing to another, and you might discover things we haven't even gotten to ourselves yet. It's quite a bit. And gee, there's one of them I'm thinking of in particular, which is a link from, it's the fifth one down in our show notes tonight. And it's from themadtruther.com. And in that web document, you'll find many links and things that you can follow that are sort of along the same subject. And I encourage you to do that. And I will be doing the same, and so will TMC. By the way, TMC, how are you tonight?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good.
I'm just really anxious to continue pursuing further here. Getting over a slight cold. Hang on just a second in that interest. Okay, I'm back now. I caught a cold. This is totally off topic. Caught a cold on Monday. It really hit me hard on Tuesday. And I said, oh no, what have I got? Have I got the Rona? I don't know what I had. Wednesday was not worse. Thursday was better. And the cold really started to disappear on Friday. And now I just have some lingering after effects. So I may clear my throat from time to time. So last week we were talking about artificial intelligence. Who knows how powerful it is? We talked about 5G technology and what if it's got more functionality than we know or than we suspected or than is promoted to us in our consumer devices? What if there is so much more relative to the grand expanse of complete history than we have ever been taught in school? What if there are things that are more of a galactic nature or that have effects on this planet, both in terms of things like the Schumann resonance and in terms of things like the poles, the magnetic poles migrating, that are affected by other factors, maybe further out there in the universe, that affect our sun, that affect our planet, and that cause things which we have pretty accurate geological records of things that have happened in the past on this planet. And we've been given explanations, but does that mean that those were the complete explanation? We know how science works. It's a process of essentially coming up with a theory, putting it forth, trying to show it, but then you and all your colleagues go about the process of trying to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, then it becomes more and more solid and more credible as time goes on. But at any point in time, whether you or your esteemed colleagues in the similar field are able to disprove your theory, well, then you only had to disprove it once to know that it wasn't valid. So how much effort has been spent on attempting to disprove some of what we have been, quote unquote, taught in school? Because when we dig in, we find that there are lots of unanswered questions. So that was, kind of the idea with the what if thing. Before we get too far, I actually pulled out a couple of little what ifs here, and just for your entertainment. Of course, the whole show is for your entertainment, right? So I'm just going to put one of these things up. This will be kind of a surprise to you, TMC, also. You're going to love this. Okay. Introducing the microflyer. This link to this is in your notes. Flying microchips the size of a grain of sand. And I just want to make note, there's a wonderful team of participants and supporters that we have here on this channel. And this came from one of you guys, and you know who you are, and I know who you are, but nobody else knows who you are, but maybe they know who you are. What if some company starts building multitudes of these things, microflyers, the smallest ever human-made flying structure. And this is a picture of it right here. Let's see, does it look all right? Let me take a look on the other screen here, make sure this is displaying okay for you. We don't want to take any chances, we don't want the screen too small, because the flyer is already microscopic as it is, so you're not even going to be able to see the thing. Would you guys like me to narrate this? Okay. Seeds have evolved to have sophisticated aerodynamics, enabling them to fall slowly and maximize distribution. This is how plants reproduce, at least plants that have flying seeds.
And that has the effect of increasing the dispersal distance from the tree. And that's the name of the game, is spreading the seeds as far as possible.
Those look a lot like the way maple tree seeds fall to the ground, if I'm not mistaken. Inspired by nature, a team of engineers at Northwestern University have developed the first flying microchip. Just what we needed. Am I going to fall off my chair or what? Do we really need flying microchips? I mean, I never mind. Comments?
Yeah, they used them in Desert Storm and the subsequent conflicts in the Middle East. It's known as smart dust. And this is just cute and fluffy exposure to this type of technology.
They can make them fluffy, I'm sure. They could put a nice, cushy coating on the outside. They could even perhaps, spray them with something that was attractive to, let's say you take one of these things and you just put just the slightest taste of something sugary on it. And then these things are flying around and insects are out there. So an insect grabs one of these and says, hey, wow, this is good. And before you know it, that's on the back of, you ever seen honeybees when they've got like a big load of pollen? It's like stuck to their legs. So then they start flying around with it too. They could be flying around carrying microchips. So yeah, just what we need. But thanks to Northwestern University, they have there are amazing engineers and scientists out there doing work. I got to say, I marvel at what they do. But to the point that we were making last week, in the grand scheme of things, what will flying microchips do for the quality of life as we used to know it? It's quite a bit smaller than an ant.
This is just what
The goal of this project.
this is just what they're disclosing.
Right.
So,
Well, you can see at small scale level what they've got there on this essentially is probably a very small flake of some sort of a polymer. And it's got
a PCB
printed onto it a microscopic printed circuit. And this may just be an artist's rendition of what it is. It may not actually look like what you're seeing on your screen. But what you'd have for components there would be either some sort of an energy gathering apparatus, which is more likely what they have, or an onboard power supply. But the onboard power supply would take up a lot of weight, and then it might not be able to fly. So it'd probably be better if this thing could harvest energy from the environment. So I'm going to guess that we've got some sort of antennas there, okay? And then I'm going to guess that we're going to have some sort of magnetic effect, which causes this thing right where my mouse pointer is to flex in and out, and maybe even to steer itself. And what else would you deduce from this thing?
I agree. The antenna theory, and then ambient backscatter radiation, which is just what we would understand as multipath fading or unused reflected transmissions. And these transmissions are used to remotely power devices without necessarily requiring a direct connection. They can just pull power proverbially right out of the air. And something like this, in order to mitigate, like what you were saying, an onboard power supply that would be cumbersome, you would be able to integrate RCL type circuits, which allow for capacitors, for example, to store small amounts of energy.
RCL, resistance, capacitance, inductance. Yep.
Correct. And that would then allow for efficient regulation of the use or dispersion of the energy that might be stored on board. And what I'm getting at is some of the technologies that have been used for passive detection of vehicles and people and other things use this kind of technology where they can harvest the sun or ambient radiation, store small amounts of it so that, for example, at night, you would be able to regulate the amount of energy that is being used at any given time for these passive sensors.
Project has been to add capability for winged flight to electronic circuit chips, with the idea that those capabilities would allow us to distribute highly functional but miniaturized electronics.
Okay, I got to stop right there. If we take a look at the lines on the fingerprint of any one of our fingers, and you see the size of that, it's really not microscopic, but they are really small. There are normal pieces, particles of dust around my house that I'm ashamed to say are larger than that little morsel that's on that person's finger. So that little guy right there looks like one right there, right where the pointer is.
Technically
small.
Technically, this is microscopic. And the reason is that you can't see any of the variety of detail without some type of a magnifier. All you see is just a general outline of what was presented in the previous image.
Yep. Now, this is, of course, everything that we do here is, of course, for your entertainment. This is a video that is on BitChute. It's not on YouTube, this particular one. And so, of course, watch at your own risk. But we do have the link there for you. And the title of this was Flying Microchips, the Size of a Grain of Sand, Used for Population Surveillance.
with the idea that those capabilities would allow us to distribute highly functional but miniaturized electronic devices that could sense the environment for disease tracking, population surveillance, maybe monitoring of environmental contamination.
Okay, disease tracking, population surveillance, and maybe monitoring of environmental contamination. Okay, gee, what do I see up in the sky right there? Weird.
Well, it's a good point, because an aerial dispersion of technologies like this and others would enable all of those examples, and likely more, to
be facilitated.
Possible. That's right.
Well, okay.
So on. Environmental contamination and so on. So the objects that we've created consist of two parts. One is an electronic functional component.
There's a good picture of it. Okay, electronic functional component. Well, let's just listen to him. That is a good picture, though.
That has an overall size scale in the range of 1 millimeter. So almost like a tiny grain of sand. But we've integrated with that electronic chip wing structures that form almost what looks like a helicopter. And so as these structures fall through the air, in interaction between the air and those wings cause a rotational motion that creates a very stable
helicopter. Back again.
And so as these structures fall through the air...
I muted it. So take a look at the movement there. I'm going to try to just have that. All right, so what you see right here, if you take a look at this round part, this looks to me like a coil. And that coil, anytime you coil up wire, you now have created something that either will be an antenna or an electromagnet. And depending on the frequency that's going through it, it's either going to receive or it's going to output at that frequency, which is based on the coil structure. And in this case, if there's a magnetic field and if you have electricity going through here, and if you've engineered this coil in such a specific way as to interact with either a background magnetic field or to create one based on energy that it's harvesting from the environment, it quite possibly could flex. And if they've engineered it in such a way that it flexes the way that they want it to, it'll do exactly what I thought you were going to see. I think I went a little, right there. That's beautiful. So
something else to add with this, if you can go back to an image of it where it's flat, and what I want to show you is, okay, that's good. So you've got the windings that are at basically your 9 and 3 o'clock position. And then you've got at the 12 and 6 o'clock position, something that looks different. And what this looks like to me is the ability to energize specific coils or specific elements of the coil, which allows for frequency tuning. And what this enables is basically software-defined transmitter and a software-defined receiver, otherwise known as a transceiver. And this design is pretty much standard in anything that has a coil these days. And what I'm getting at is something like a watch or a phone having a wireless charging apparatus that is a multifunctional component within the device that provides power or receives power and provides proximity sensing or near field communication technologies. And we would understand near field communication technologies like using your phone or your watch to pay for something by placing that device near a module or a kiosk and a communication occurring between the two. The reason I want to emphasize a watch is because something as small as a watch, the form factor of a watch, enables all of those things to occur with a single unitary hardware component that is something like a coil. Yep. In addition to coils, the tunability and the selectivity of what you choose to energize in a conductor can also be done with something like an inverted F planar antenna, which are very common in mobile and or electronic devices in general. And what they do there is they're able to segment a piece of metal in such a way that you have a conductor and then an insulator and a conductor and an insulator, and each one of the conductor sections are tied in independently to the circuit board that allows for software to regulate how much of the conductor is being used as a transceiver.
The idea is that you optimize the design of the tracings of the microscopic print that you're putting onto whatever the polymer substrate is for whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it be what frequency you're trying to work with or what type of a mechanical or electromagnetic effect you're looking for. Basically, they can print anything on anything these days and do it microscopically. So it's really just taking something that's conductive and putting it onto something that's an insulator in a pattern that you want that works with whatever frequencies and wavelengths you're trying to interact with.
Yeah, they can also grow this stuff with biologic material in the same fashion.
Yep. So what was fascinating me was the next little animated clip, which was how they designed this in such a way. You're looking at how it interacts with air, and it shifts the direction of the airflow. There's the maple tree seed. All right, well, you know what? Let's turn the audio back on here.
The air, in interaction between the air and those wings, cause a rotational motion that creates a very stable, slow falling velocity that allows these structures to interact for extended periods with ambient wind that really enhances the dispersal process, much like seeds do in the biological world. We think we've beaten biology in a sense.
Gee, why did that just give me the heebie-jeebies? Beating biology? Wow. It's really taking something on there, buddy. You're really taking it. You're going to beat biology. Okay. All right.
Another thought occurred to me. If these things were dispersed, what would stop a polymer, for example, being of a synthetic or natural made substance, ultimately biodegrading, that could then potentially be absorbed by some other biological plant, animal, insect, whatever. And then that then becomes part of the food supply.
Yep. And food supply, not just food supply, entering into the food chain and propagating through it in different parts of the food chain, and perhaps having different interactive effects depending on what stage in the food chain it is in. How big fish eat smaller fish eat smaller one, and then those get eaten by something else. So that's the whole food chain. And of course, we eat fish too. So it could be a different effect inside each of those living creatures as this thing moves and migrates through.
If we were to expound on this,
like onboard features that are just sleepers, they're not activated yet until they get to, let's say, the tertiary or the quaternary target organism. You know what I was getting at there, kind of?
Yeah. If we were to expound on this hypothesis, what this would allow for is a tracking system through the manufacturing, transportation, and life cycle, if you will. And this ties into the Internet of Everything, so that you can potentially disperse this stuff in raw materials that will then be used for a variety of consumption, whether it be food or otherwise, as well as just a general deposit that would allow for tracking what we would understand as regular commerce type tracking. So this is a very interesting video.
I'll play the last 20 seconds of it here.
We think we've beaten biology in a sense.
Some of the microflyers are built with a material developed in Roger's lab that will allow them to naturally degrade and disappear in groundwater over time.
There it is.
I got more there. What if on this microflyer there are some specifically engineered nanoparticles which also have a functionality, and those are extremely light in weight and very easy for the microflyer to carry, literally like as cargo, right? So the microflyer then degrades and disappears into quote unquote groundwater or a water reservoir or whatever, just for your entertainment. And then after the microflyer degrades, normal biological decomposition of whatever type of polymer it was made of, it releases the other nanoparticles into wherever the target location for the microflyer to have flown to was. I'm still on the what if thing, you know? Kind of fun, huh? I have more.
Yeah, man, go for it.
You want more?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
More fun stuff. Well, want to give us a little bit of a preview of where you're figuring on going tonight. I do have one or two links loaded to that effect, but well, where are you figuring we're going to go here tonight when we start frying our brains?
If you hand me share, I'm likely not going to hand it back, so it's up to you, buddy.
Okay, all right, then I'm going to do this one as well. You know what? This link is there for you, but I'm actually not going to play this one. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to put this up, and because we try to stay kind of unbiased here, you know, we try to bring information for you to digest and you to make sense of it. So I'm just going to put this up on the screen, and the link is in your show notes, and I would encourage you, if you're so inclined, to go ahead and check this one out. So this is just in reference to 5G and graphene, and you might find this of interest as well. This is only 15 minutes long. The title of this is 5G and the Graphene Connection. This is how their plan to control all of us is going to go down. And so the whole title is here. I didn't have it all there.
So when we get to talking about graphene again, we might add this video as a supplementary.
All right.
But I don't think we're quite ready yet.
Not quite there.
I found some things today that were quite remarkable. And
well, let's dive in, TMC. I think we're all primed for it. Oh, just another thing. And once again, this video does not claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. And there was a kind of a little independent newscast that was going on earlier today, which featured President Trump and his review of what many people have been waiting for, which was the Arizona Maricopa County audit recount. But what if the people who did that recount actually did a good job, because they seemed like they were fairly well qualified people? And what if the results would be different from what we seem to have accepted? That's just another little what if. And of course, that's completely out of the scope of what we cover here on Cyberhuman Frontiers. And we do not even try to give political opinion, let alone political advice. Just saying. That was just earlier tonight before we started our show. All right. It's all yours, TMC. Go for it.
Exposure is the key. And
truth, illumination, exposure.
Yeah. So we stopped last show on this particular website, and we stopped here discussing the potential effects of electromagnetic radiation. Today, we're going to focus on microwave hearing. And before we go there, we're going to watch and read some of the statements here. And I pulled some links out of this document that we'll review, and then get into voice to skull communication. So we're going to start here. This was back in 1975, church committee hearings. And here we go. If it'll play. Wow. We're not going to watch this whole thing.
The senators seemed unimpressed. Perhaps it was because they already knew too much. Each senator arriving with a fat, orange-colored notebook crammed with classified material about the CIA, all marked top secret. After 5 months of closed-door investigation, of talking in private with intelligence agents and officials, most of the senators now agree with Chairman Frank Church that the CIA has indeed been a rogue elephant out of control. So the testimony of Colby didn't allay the suspicions. The hearings took place in the historic Senate caucus room, scene of the dramatic Watergate investigation just 2 years ago.
So we'll stop there. This is in the links. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. It says here, last year it was revealed the mainstream science had caught up with the Black Project world, CIA, and had successfully weakened or strengthened particular memories from our brain, or outright deleted inherited memories from mice. And there's a link. There was a series of CIA mind control programs, including Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Ultra, MK Search, MK Naomi, during the 50s to the 90s. This was a long time ago. The CIA sought to blank slate test subjects, wiping memories through drugs, electric shock, high-pitched sound, and other torture techniques. So here we go. Although many suspect that this project involved a South American plant derivative, scopolamine, a dangerous substance known as the zombie drug, documents released only a few weeks ago in the JFK files suggest that the CIA was using electromagnetic weaponry to accomplish this goal. It all started out with using electrodes on a subject's brain, and I suspect evolving into tapping into the brain's own natural frequency over time, as the Army document details on voice-to-skull technology decades later. And we're going to continue forward. There's quite a bit of information to get to, and I want to show you this person.
This report I received today is a monumental document in more ways than one. But it is a very, very important piece of America's history, and it will shape America's future in ways that will make us a more honorable, more successful, and more ethical country.
I want to pause here and sort of frame what this guy and most of our corrupt bureaucracy does with respect to their speech and their statements. They are very well educated in being able to speak to the masses in a way that provides a perception of safety and comfort and reliability, when in fact, if you were to invert what they're saying, they are in fact speaking amongst themselves on a different level or plane. So with that, we'll continue.
I would like to review today with a little more detail than Dr. Fraden said, because I think it must be engraved on our national memory. Thousands of government-sponsored experiments did take place. at hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. The goal was to understand the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. While most of the tests were ethical by any standards, some were unethical, not only by today's standards, but by the standards of the time in which they were conducted. They failed both the test of our national values and the test of humanity. Informed consent means your doctor tells you the risk of the treatment you are about to undergo. In too many cases, informed consent was withheld. Americans were kept in the dark about the effects of what was being done to them. The deception extended beyond the test subjects themselves to encompass their families and the American people as a whole. For these experiments were kept secret, and they were shrouded not for a compelling reason of national security, but for the simple fear of embarrassment, and that was wrong. So today, on behalf of another generation of American leaders and another generation of American citizens, the United States of America offers a sincere apology to those of our citizens who were subjected to these experiments, to their families, and to their communities. When the government does wrong, we have a moral responsibility to admit it. The duty we owe to one another to tell the truth and to protect our fellow citizens from excesses like these is one we can never walk away from. Our government failed in that duty, and it offers an apology to the survivors and their families, and to all the American people who must be able to rely upon the United States to keep its word, to tell the truth, and to do the right thing. Make no mistake, as the committee report says, there are circumstances where compensation is appropriate as a matter of ethics and principle. I am committed to seeing to it that the United States of America lives up to its responsibility. Our greatness is measured not only in how we so frequently do right, but also how we act when we know we've done the wrong thing, how we confront our mistakes, make our apologies, and take action. That's why this morning I signed an executive order instructing every arm and agency of our government that conducts, supports, or regulates research involving human beings to review immediately their procedures in light of the recommendations of this report and the best knowledge and standards available today, and to report back to me by Christmas.
We are anonymous. We are legion.
All right. So I'm going to digress here for a second and show you exactly what happened after this man admits to extensive testing on people, places, and things with electromagnetic energy. And what I'm going to show you is the National Technology Transfer Act. And this was in 1995, which was the same year that this guy just made that speech. Just my computer, since I started researching today, slowed down dramatically. So just bear with me here. National Technology Transfer Advancement Act of 1995. And what this talks about is the merger of corporate government partnership to share technologies in order to reduce the cost of the taxpayers. And what this means is proprietary, secret knowledge was handed to corporations to then conduct research in partnership with the government. I encourage you to look this up and to read it. The next thing I'm going to show you is the
Just a little interjection there. You know where the waters really get muddy is when something's handed off from the government to a private corporation, because ostensibly it's just cheaper or more efficient to outsource that and let them handle all little details. Well, then the next step that happens, which is often much more quiet, is that United States company starts manufacturing elsewhere or forms some sort of a trade alliance or some sort of a partnership with someone else in another country that's overseas, i.e. maybe China or something. And that opens the whole doorway for the complete undermining of anything secure about whatever it is that we originally had.
Yeah, to that point, once this information or this technology is transferred into the public space, it then becomes accessible with the very same technologies that we're covering tonight, right, and more. Right. So the 1996 Telecommunications Act is something that we're just going to go to Wikipedia because we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But what it says here is the Telecommunications Act of 96 was the first significant overhaul of telecom and the laws in more than 60 years, amending the Communications Act of 1934. The act, signed by Bill Clinton, represented a major change in American telecommunication law, since it was the first time the internet was included in broadcasting and spectrum allotment. They go into the FCC. The goal of the law was to let anyone enter any communications business, to let any communications business compete in any market against any other. And in this act, what they did was line out what was safe and not safe for broadcast transmissions. And they have things in here that talk about wireless service competition, wireless telephony, IP video, cable TV. And if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've looked at this. It doesn't. During this time, they started breaking up spectrum for cable TV, adding transmitters, allowing for phased array and multiplex signals to be input into everybody's home. And this opened the door for modern wireless mobile telecommunications. So this has been ongoing for a long time. Going back to this article that we started with, we're going to breeze through this quickly. And what we're going to focus on is voice to skull. And one of the patents, which is here, and I have it selected, we'll look at it in a minute, discusses a hearing system where sound is induced in the head of a person by radiating the head with microwaves in the range of 100 megahertz to 10,000 megahertz, which is 10 gigahertz. And they're modulated with a particular waveform. So
actually modulating the waveform of whatever you want the person to hear onto that combination of high frequencies.
Correct. You have a carrier wave, and then you have another wave that has the information on it.
Right.
And there's a couple ways to do this. And if we have time, we'll look at some of the specifics. What I want to show you here is that the military was using this stuff in Kuwait during Desert Storm. Psychotronic technology wasn't directly beaming frequencies into people, but rather using radio stations.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
To broadcast a signal outside of the human hearing range, which was
they
used by
existing infrastructure.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that 1995 Transfer Act and the 1996 Telecom Act sort of hit home, literally, in your homes with this kind of technology, because this was used at war in 91. And in 95, they started ushering in this corporate government partnership. Silent sound spread spectrum. U.S. psychological operations officers tested this technology on Iraqi troops in Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. And they talk about using UHF frequency bands and talking about it being completely silent to the human ear. The negative voice messages placed on tapes alongside audible programming by PSYOP psychologists were clearly perceived by the subconscious minds of the Iraqi soldiers. And the silent messages completely demoralized and instilled a perpetual feeling of fear and hopelessness into their minds.
This was done. My big thing is this, done with existing infrastructure. Guys, wake up call. We have a whole lot of existing infrastructure here in the United States, which we innocuously refer to as our ground-based broadcast television and our Wi-Fi and our cell phone signals. We have a huge amount of infrastructure that could be silently purposed for something else. And I don't know that we'd have any way of knowing if it was being done.
Right. So another piece in here that's of interest, it's long been known that microwaves at certain frequencies can produce an auditory effect that sound like it's coming from within someone's head. Then there's the question of classified microwave works at Brooks Air Force Base, which officials have refused to talk about. 2007, WAPO wrote on the same subject. The 2002 Air Force Research Laboratory patented precisely such technology, using microwaves to send words into someone's head. And we will continue. I want to breeze through this. Radio hypnotic intracerebral control. 1963, CIA issued a manual about this. When part of your brain receives a tiny electrical impulse from outside sources such as vision, hearing, etc., an emotion is produced. Anger at the sight of a gang of boys beating an old woman, for example. The same emotions of anger can be created by artificial radio signals sent to your brain by a controller. You can instantly feel the same white-hot anger without any apparent reason.
Our emotions are really very good. They're a vital part of our overall functioning structure if they're our own and if they're genuine. But if they're not, the first thing that emotions usually do is they subordinate the intellect and they cause us to become reactive, which is fine in a situation in which we need that to survive or to protect ourselves. But if it's being manipulated, go on, sorry.
It's okay. Emotions are a critical part of interpreting our existence and our experience here. And if you can disrupt, interrupt, replace, or override an emotional component of your experience, you invariably change your perception of your entire reality. And on that note, it says here in a 1964 memo to the Warren Commission regarding the possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald had been mind controlled, right? Helms outlined the existence of biological radio communication, cybernetic science of communication and control theory that is concerned with the study of automatic control systems such as the brain and mechanical electrical communications. This guy admits can be used in molding of a child's character, the inculcation of knowledge and techniques, the amassing of experience,
setting of values,
the establishment of social behavior patterns, all functions which can be summarized as control of the growth process of the individual. So they talk about in the brochure cybernetic techniques, and this was distributed by Mankind Research Unlimited, and EMR study facility in Washington, D.C. detailed the deep state's development of a means by which information of a modest rate can be fed to humans utilizing other senses than sight or hearing. According to the brochure, the CIA's cybernetic technique based on Eastern European research, Soviet USSR stuff, involved beaming information via radio frequencies to individual human nerve cells.
The purpose, the directive stated, was for the enhancement of a subject's mental and physical performance. And they go in and talk about the public rollout. First team demonstrates brain-to-brain connection back in August of 2013. I've looked at patents that show that this technology was available back in the 70s. So this is the soft rollout, if you will, of this notion of your brain basically being a cell phone. Neuroscientists in France implanted false memories into the brains of sleeping mice in 2015 using electrodes to directly stimulate and record the activity of nerve cells. They created artificial associative memories that persisted while the animals snoozed and then influenced their behavior when they finally woke up. Massachusetts Institute of Technology scientists also achieved the same result using mice in a similar experiment prior in 2013. And the MIT experiment was done with optogenetics using light. Light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, so technically it's in the same general family of microwave and millimeter wave. Light is simply a higher frequency that carries more energy per photon.
Right.
And they talk about Japan working on this stuff, and then other reports from the Daily Mail and the HuffPo. And we will continue. I want to highlight this real quick, noting the date, August 27, 2012, sensing cyborg tissues. Scientists have developed a technique for constructing silicon nanowire tissue scaffolds that contain
Nothing new to us. We've talked about it. Yep.
Yeah. That contain nanoscale electrodes capable of monitoring intra and extracellular function within living biological tissues. The porous three-dimensional biocompatible scaffolds can be generated as a mesh or a planar construct, which means 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions, and manipulated into just about any shape required before seeding these systems within living cells. Nano. Embedded in the framework are silicon nanowire field effect transistors, detectors that can monitor and detect changes in physiochemical parameters within tissues grown through the scaffold. Initial experiments demonstrate utility of the platform to monitor electrical responses in tissue grown from cardiac and neural cells, and also to monitor pH changes in synthetic blood vessels constructed from smooth muscle cells. Harvard University and MIT researchers claim the technology marks the first time that electronics and tissue engineering have been combined at the scale of the structure within extracellular matrices surrounding cells, and without affecting cell viability, which means your cells don't die, and it doesn't affect cell functionality. And what that means is your cells, a heart cell, for example, can continue to beat in its normal fashion. And the cyborging component is being able to remotely interact using these silicon nanowires to induce some type of a change in the functionality of, for example, a heart cell or a neuron.
Or the whole organ or parts of the organ, the heart
Correct.
organ. Yep.
We've gone over how neurons and heart cells, for that matter, function in a non-linear way. And so what that means is that a very few cells can potentially disrupt, impact, or change normal function amongst many other respective cells, heart cells, brain cells, nervous system cells.
Yep.
Because it's a non-linear effect. And what happens is when you start driving these cells, you can create a memory, if you will, so that a lesser amount of energy or a lesser amount of stimuli can then be used to direct electrical function. And that is the overall cyborging concept, if you will.
There are two different little frontiers here, just so that we don't get confused. This is the extracellular silicon conductive fibers, external to the cells. But we've also talked a little bit about technology and developments on the intracellular level. And that's more where something at an atomic size, like graphene and making graphene microtubules, comes in, because those can be small enough and can be built in such a way that they're coated that they're not toxic to the internals of a cell. Right now, we're talking about extracellular, but there is also work that we've talked about, and we'll get to it again, at the intracellular level. So just to clarify that.
Yeah. So I want to share with you this. Scientists have to date struggled to develop a synthetic tissue system that can monitor cellular activity and physiochemical changes deep within a tissue in real time without damaging the cells. Previous efforts to create bioengineered sensing networks have focused on two-dimensional layouts where cultured cells are grown on top of electronic components, or on conformal layouts where the probes are placed on tissue surfaces. In contrast, the new technique takes at its inspiration the ability of the autonomic nervous system to keep track of pH, chemistry, oxygen, and other factors within every tissue in the body.
So are you saying that it's connecting with the autonomic nervous system?
It is
to take advantage of the way that it monitors all of those physiological parameters?
It's connecting and or creating a synthetic version of it. This is a cyborging. So it would be able to monitor, manage, and manipulate something like the autonomic nervous system, which keeps track of these things: pH, chemistry, oxygen, and other factors. Check this out. Biological or biocompatible nanowire electronic scaffolds designed to mimic this ability comprise three basic building blocks: semiconductor nanowires, polymer precursors, and the cells themselves. The nanowires are deposited into a polymer to generate a basic nanowire field effect transistor lattice. This is nanocircuitry in a biological, folks. And the polymer is subsequently removed. So the polymer is used as a basic scaffold to get the nanowires in the appropriate shape or construct. Yep. The resulting nanowire field effect transistor devices then are lithographically patterned and integrated into freestanding macroporous scaffolds to generate the nano-ES construct. And combined with synthetic or natural macroporous extracellular matrices to provide an overall structure that has electrical sensory function while retaining biocompatibility to enable tissue culture. So we will go back to some of these articles that were pulled from the first document. And for posterity's sake, we're going over this FOIA that shows potential mind control. And this is from Democratic Fundamentalism. And it says here, high-tech psychological warfare arrives in the Middle East, March 23rd, 1991. Sources in Iran today revealed what might have been a true reason for the seemingly illogical and apparent suicidal attack by Iraqi troops. And what I want to show you here is what they did. They went in and they had basic radio transmitters when they went into Kuwait and Iraq in 91. That was their infrastructure. So the military orders were to encode and then transmit with Baghdad's military FM radio stations. These signals are received and rebroadcast in turn by designated FM radio stations located between Baghdad and Kuwait until the programming arrives at the designated control station of the day, which then broadcasts directly on the troops in Kuwait on exactly 100 megahertz frequency. This frequency was continuously monitored by all, and what they're referring to are the troops using the FM radios to be able to communicate with each other. In order to nullify the Iraqi military line of communications, the U.S. PSYOP organization attached to the U.S. CENTCOM in Tehran installed a portable frequency modulated broadcast transmitter, a gasoline generator, and continuous tape recordings on top of the tallest building in the desert city of Al-Kajafi. The station transmitted on 100 megahertz, and its power output was adjusted to cover up the transmission of the Iraqi station operating on the exact same frequency. According to statements made by the captured and deserting Iraqi soldiers, the most devastating and demoralizing program was the first known military use of the new high-tech type of subliminal messaging referred to as ultra-high frequency silent sounds or silent subliminals. Although completely silent to the human ear, the negative voice messages placed on the tapes alongside the audible programming by psyops psychologists were clearly perceived by the subconscious minds of the Iraqi soldiers, and the silent messages completely demoralized them and instilled a perpetual feeling of fear and hopelessness in their minds. It was necessary for the Iraqi tank commander or other crew members to listen to the FM station 24 hours a day for quickly changing deployment orders. They were being exposed to the silent sounds during the same listening periods. They go into other operations, if you will, Riyadh, however you say that, Saudi Arabia is the other example they give. So we will continue. We're not going to read this whole document. This is a great document for you to read. Bioeffects of selected non-lethal weapons. And this was Freedom of Information Act requested back in 2006. And what this gets into is this idea of using light and lasers, radio frequency directed energy, and sound waves to influence biological systems. And it talks about these at a high level. Incapacitating effect of microwave heating. This is like your LRAD technology. Biological target, normal functions and disease state. So this is where they can do something like give you cancer, give you heat stress, give you brain damage, up to and including death, disorientation, delirium, convulsions. Syndrome is popularly referred to as sunstroke or heat stroke. Hyperthermia is prolonged brain damage, interferes with central thermal regulatory mechanisms, sweat secretion, things like that. Mechanisms to produce the desired effects, 40 years of experience in microwaves. NASA put out a document that summarized a bunch of studies in the 60s and the 70s. The number of the NASA document, if you want to look this up, is 16661. If you type in NASA electromagnetic and 16661, you will see what I am referring to. They talk about experimenting on monkeys and picking various frequencies to figure out where to selectively deposit energy deep within the body of an animal. They use a dose rate of 10 watts per kilogram in this case. And they say here that these effects are irreversible if you increase this temperature to 42 degrees Celsius. And they show here a lower dose rate, allowing a temperature increase to 41.5 degrees Celsius, which is half a degree Celsius less, that can be induced in less than 2 hours. And this is a reversible function, which means that a rapid drop in the body temperature is possible when the RF exposure is stopped or terminated before reaching the critical temperature of 42 degrees Celsius. Rats were also tested on, and we can continue to move forward. They talk about the tunability. Tunable. Any rate of heating up to a maximum capacity of the source may be obtained. And they use the term rheostatic, which is the old knobs that you would use to turn up or turn down the volume or change your radio
variable
station.
Yep.
Right. Distribution of human sensitivities to desired effects. Individuals with compromised thermoregulatory mechanisms would be susceptible with a lower incident energy density. This would include people with organic damage to the hypothalamus, the part of the brain that integrates the autonomic mechanisms which control heat loss, as well as people with compromised somatic features of heat loss. And so what this means is that somebody can be potentially damaged heavily one time, and then much lower levels of RF radiation can then be used to induce a variety of effects on their biological systems. And they talk about aiming this stuff, incapacitating with microwave hearing. Microwave hearing is the phenomenon described by human observers as the sensation of buzzing, ticking, hissing, or knocking sounds that originate within or immediately behind the head. There is no sound propagating through the air like normal sound. This technology in its crudest form can be used to distract individuals. If refined, it could be used to communicate with hostages or hostage takers directly by Morse code or other messaging systems, possibly even by voice communication. They talk about biological target, normal function, and disease state. Different types of sounds were heard depending upon particulars of the pulse characteristics. Various experiments were performed on humans and laboratory animals exploring the origin of this phenomenon. At this time, virtually all investigators who have studied the phenomenon now accept thermoelastic expansion of the brain. This is called thermo-acoustics. The pressure wave of which is received and processed by the cochlear microphonic system to be the mechanism of acoustic perception of short pulses of radio frequency energy. Pay attention closely. One study in 1975 using human volunteers identified the threshold energy of microwave auditory responses in humans as a function of pulse width for 2,450 megahertz radio frequency energy. And that, folks, is 2.45 gigahertz. And that, folks, has been used for decades now for your Wi-Fi and your Bluetooth connections. 2.45 gigahertz is an open standard that is used for any of your modem / Wi-Fi access with your cable modem box or your telephone modem box or your cell phone or your computer or any of your connected devices that talk with each other on a Bluetooth frequency. 1975 is when this stuff was apparently experimented with on humans. So they get into thermoelastic expansion within the brain in response to the RF pulses, were studied and demonstrated in inert materials, and was proposed as the mechanism of hearing of pulsed RF fields. And I think we're going to move on because they're getting into the nuances of this stuff. We'll stop here. This looks interesting. Incapacitating effect, disruption of neural control. The nature of the incapacitation is a rhythmic activity synchronization of brain neurons that disrupt normal cortical control of the cortical, spinal, and cortical cochlear pathways. This disrupts normal functioning of the spinal motor neurons, which control muscle contractions and body movements. Persons suffering from this condition lose voluntary control of their body. This synchronization may be accompanied by a sudden loss of consciousness and intense muscle spasms. Biological target, normal functions, and disease state. This report was from the military, folks. The normal function of the brain is to control all forms of behavior, voluntary control of the body, and homeostatic parameters of the organism. In normal conditions, all brain structures and neuron populations, networks, and single unit functions within specific rhythmic activity depending on the incoming sensory information from mnemonic structures, and signals from your organs. Each signal neuron provides specific processing of information it receives and forms a specific pattern of impulse firing as outgoing information. Synchronization of neuron activity is a natural mechanism of brain function that uses such controlling processes as motivation, attention, and memory experiences in order to organize behavior. For example, motivational processes are considered as activating ascending signals that synchronize the neuron activity of specific brain structures and neuron networks. This activation, synchronization, in turn activates specific forms of behavior such as sexual, aggressive, and ingestive activities. And they go into more and more of how this works. They talk about calcium, and calcium is basically used by every one of your cells. And if you look online about the electromagnetic effects of calcium, that is some of the most commonly available information as it relates to non-thermal biological effects of electromagnetic radiation on the body. And what I'm getting at is the ionization and liquefaction and the ability to synchronize with calcium in your cells can be done at energy levels well below what is currently regulated with organizations like the FCC and ANSI. They talk about GABA receptors. And this, folks, is where we get into SSRIs and other types of mood regulating medication that allows for a greater control of the brain and or the nervous system or anywhere else GABA receptors exist in your body with electromagnetics.
So just to translate that, GABA receptors, they incorporate an amino acid that serves as an inhibitory neurotransmitter between nerve cells and the brain and the spinal cord. So what they do is they tend to bind and mute things. So depending on what the modulation of the GABA is, then it's either going to allow the transmission or inhibit the transmission. Basically, their primary function when there's a lot of it and when they're in the right place is to block impulses between nerve cells.
Yeah, so the way this would work with a wind-up toy is you put them on some type of a GABA medication or other type of SSRI, which puts their neural pathway systems into a regulated state. Since we're talking about GABA, what this would do is put somebody in a hypnotic sleep trance-like state. And from there, you would be able to proverbially remotely pilot them to do whatever it is you wanted them to do. And this is the basics of how they make a wind-up toy. And a lot of people take this kind of medication these days, folks. Very, very dangerous. There were reports by the Bradford Institute in the early 2000s that discussed using SSRIs, GABA, and other types of neuropharmacology to pacify populations. And I have those documents, but I don't have them loaded, so I'm not going to show them to you. But if you search Bradford Institute non-lethal, you will find this type of technology or these types of techniques being discussed as non-lethal mechanisms for controlling populations. And they talk about mechanisms to reproduce desired effects. Electromagnetic pulses is a conceptual non-lethal technology using electromagnetic energy to induce neurosynchronization and disruption of voluntary muscle control. The effectiveness of this concept has not been demonstrated. However, from past work in evaluating the potential for electromagnetic pulse generators to affect humans, it is estimated that sufficiently strong external fields can be generated within the brain to trigger neurons. I want to note here that the closer you get to the brain, whether it be a phone or a watch or connected clothing or conductive electric or electrogenic cells or nanotech that creates cybernetics in your organs, the less energy you need to induce these types of interactions with the brain. So with that, we will continue. We're going to highlight some patents. I'm not going to read a bunch of them. There are quite a few, and I had to stop earlier today searching because the patent pool, if you will, is ripe with this kind of technology. And it runs from what we're looking at here to therapeutic electromagnetic technologies that do all kinds of things like fix anything and everything that's broken in your body. So these are dual use technologies, and I want to emphasize that the intent here is to not induce any fear or any general concern. This is simply for entertainment and education. With that, thought transmission units send modulated electromagnetic wave beams to a human receiver to influence thoughts and actions without an electronic receiver. So the human, the brain, the bones, the skull, your organs are the receiver. Your brain inside of your skull essentially functions as a resonance chamber. Your organs function as a resonance chamber. Every single component within your body, down to a specific gene in your genetics, has a unique resonant profile. At this point, we're looking at the head being a resonance chamber so that thermoelastic waves, thermoacoustic waves, can be induced into your brain using your bone, your skull, as a resonance chamber. The next patent talks about an apparatus for electrophysiological stimulation. This was back in 19 78. Apparatus for the electrophysiological stimulation of a patient is provided for creating an analgesic condition in the patient to induce sleep, treat psychosomatic disorders, and to aid in the induction of electrohypnosis and altered states of consciousness. This is achieved by repetitive stimuli in the patient for whom external influences, namely those of sight and sound, are intentionally excluded. So these stimuli are occurring in other ways besides information going into your eyes and your ears. The apparatus produces electrical stimulation of the patient in the form of a modulated wave, which produces impulses in the delta, theta, alpha, and beta regions of the brain's electrical activity. The electrical stimulation being accompanied by two sources of audio stimulation, one of which is sinusoidal tone modulated by and synchronized with electrical stimulation, and the others derived from sound recordings. What they're getting at here is the potentiality for what they call infrasonic, below what the human can hear, and ultrasonic, above what the human can hear, as being audio stimulation. The electrical stimulation can be done in a variety of ways. This one, 1988, a hearing system. Sound is induced into the head of a person by radiating the head with microwaves in the range of 100 megahertz to 10,000 megahertz, which is 10 gigahertz. These are modulated with a particular waveform. The waveform consists of frequency modulated bursts. Each burst is made up of 10 to 20 uniformly spaced pulses grouped tightly together. The burst width is between 500 nanoseconds and 100 microseconds. The pulse width is in the range of 10 nanoseconds to 1 microsecond. The bursts are frequency modulated by the audio input to create the sensation of hearing in the person whose head is irradiated. I want to go back and emphasize this frequency range here, 100 megahertz to 10 gigahertz. When you look at ultra-wideband technologies that exist in every new device that is coming out online today, ultra-wideband is well within these ranges. It is approximately 3 gigahertz up to about 12 or a little bit more gigahertz for ultra-wideband. These technologies are now deployed amongst the general population in mass. We're going to watch a video.
In San Diego, California, Woody Norris, developer of the LRAD, describes another of his acoustic technologies known as hypersonic sound.
It's kind of like radio stations, except in this case, you don't need a receiver. To hear a radio station, I got to have a receiver. With this, the mixing actually happens in the air, and you hear it without any other device. So if I aim it at you, and it happens to hit both of your ears, and I'm reluctant to say this, it'll be as though the sound is inside your head. This time I'll come all the way around in case you're getting a lot of echo from the room. Much of it is people pleading for help because they've been hearing voices in their head for years. And now this technology explains it. If it's my sound, turn your head, plug your ears, cover your head, sound goes away. If it doesn't, it's not me.
The observation of the phenomena came way back during the Second World War, and the radar operators, accidentally noticed that when they stand in front of the radar, Sometimes they can hear clicks in their head. Somebody by the name of Alan Fry who had talked to some of the radar operators based on their report, and he conducted a very simple laboratory experiment. Indeed, showed that human beings can hear the radar pulses. They were not just making it up.
They wanted to know what the significance of something like this would be if man had another sensory motor input. And of course, the possibilities are staggering. Like you have another sense like sight, only you're not using it. What do you think that would imply? It means you're walking around being blind to something that's constantly giving you inputs, but you're not aware of it. Well, the first implication on that would be a weapon.
There was some concerns because the American embassy in Moscow was reported to have been bombarded by microwaves. So the speculation was that are they trying to gather intelligence, or are they trying to actually mess with the brains of the embassy personnel? So there was some experiments being conducted. Of course, then they were involved in some other things which I'm not involved in, which are classified in Nature.
Dr. Lin configured the equipment for the 1973 experiment performed at the Walter Reed Army Research Institute, wherein the experimenters successfully encoded speech and transmitted it via microwaves. The subject of the experiment, Dr. Joseph C. Sharp, was able to hear the spoken words for 1 through 10, and the results were published in the Journal of the American Psychological Association. And while Dr. Sharp verified these results during a personal interview with the filmmakers, he declined to have his voice or image recorded, stating that the technology was still too controversial.
In ordinary sound perception, sound that goes into the ear canal gets amplified by the small bones in the middle ear and then gets to the inner ear where the cochlea resides, and in the cochlea is converted to electrical impulse. But fundamentally, the physical phenomena that enables it is mechanical movement of particles. So the mechanical wave transmitted by the bones of the middle ear gets converted at the inner ear into the electrical impulses. But in the case of a microwave auditory effect, the source is electromagnetic. So if you expose the biological tissue to a pulse of microwave energy, the tissue expands and induces a vibration. Instead of going through the middle ear, the microwave-induced vibration gets propagated to the inner ear directly, and at the inner ear is converted to electrical impulses again. And in this case, a vibration in the human tissue, if the tissue is the head, for example, will fall within the auditory range of a human subject.
This is like another sensory motor input that man has not yet learned how to use.
Of course, you could, as I say, if you have a high enough power system, you can have a group of people subjected to the same type of a phenomena.
There's all kinds of applications there, you know, in terms of making someone think they're crazy. To hear voices in your head, what do you think that's about? If you started hearing voices in your head and it wasn't your voice.
I don't know whether it is true or not. I think there's a sizable number of people who think this is being used for mind control. Mind control
Is right at the top of the list. That obviously is what everybody would like to do, is control everybody's opinion on something, right?
I think if somebody who wants to do it, there is the potential.
So this is the U.S. Air Force, 1996. Just going back to that general timeline with Clinton. Method and device for implementing the radio frequency hearing effect. And they're using carrier suppressed modulation, single sideband carrier suppressed amplitude modulation, which is a single sideband or both sidebands. And if we ever discuss beam forming, the way this works is you use a phased array system and it generates a main lobe or a main beam, and you have lobes that come off the side. And those side lobes are not necessarily used for what we understand as conventional wireless communications. If you steer the main beam around, you also steer around the side lobes. And what they talk about here is being able to use those side lobes for this radio frequency effect. This is another one. And method and an apparatus for inducing desired states of consciousness using what they call a frequency follow response. And so what this is the inducement or the induction of some type of energy into the brain that is close to a normal or natural brainwave frequency. And after a period of time, the brain will steer itself over into the desired frequency that is being transmitted or induced. And that is known as a frequency follow response. Binaural beats do this very well with sound. And that is something that you can look up. Binaural beats, B-I-N-A-U-R-L, I believe.
That's correct.
They talk about sleep patterns being reproduced, brain patterns during portions of a sleep cycle, entrainment principles applied to induce sleep, entrainment principles applied in the work environment to induce and maintain a desired level of consciousness. And they talk about devices being portable. So we will continue. This is a superposition of waves, and I'm showing you this in order to illustrate what will happen or can happen when you are in a complex electromagnetic environment or when you are in a complex auditory environment. And what I mean by that is you have antennas and you have speakers on your mobile devices. I use plurality on purpose because a single device contains multiple speakers, multiple microphones, and multiple antennas. And so what I'm getting at here is you can create constructive and destructive wave interference to amplify or to remove waveform characteristics.
Do you remember, not to interrupt, but do you remember many months ago, there was a guy who shot himself out in front of the White House, and it was, he was hearing voices in his head and he needed to make it stop. He knew that he couldn't control it and he couldn't stop it. So he did himself in. Remember that one?
There's been lots of stories about that. I remember a guy who went onto a Navy yard with a shotgun, and on it he said, "My ELF weapon, my extremely low frequency weapon." And there's quite a bit of stories about people
who have experienced something like this.
Yeah, and we have to say speculation at this point because there has been no real open debate about these technologies, and we're at the point now where they're basically universally deployed.
You can't prove it, TMC. It's something that comes invisibly through the air. You can always just write it off as the person went nuts or they were imagining it. And then as soon as the transmission is stopped, it's gone. There's nothing there. It's completely untraceable.
That's right. And because none of this has really been discussed or put into the public domain with any sort of density or consistency, it is not acceptable to even consider this type of activity.
You'd be written off as a kook.
Yeah, when you're potentially standing in court, something like this would immediately discredit anything else that you have to say.
And the idea of proving it would require that you could actually capture it mid-transmission, mid-beam with a legitimate capturing device. And if it's targeted and focused by way of, like, let's say, multiple coincident beams of energy that only reach their focal point inside the skull of a particular person, then whatever you might capture with one device is literally impossible to be able to capture all of the pieces, because you don't know what angle each of, let's say there were three, that they're coming from. And it only is going to be intelligible as something that was weaponized to the target individual if you capture all of them and put them all together so that all of the wave shapes are reassembled in the interference patterns that they came to be in inside that person's skull, so that you could then decipher what the signal, message, or voice in the skull was. It's virtually so hard to be able to capture that out in the wild.
Yes and no. If you had the right software, what you would be able to do is use the available antennas and or other components to pick up the ambient effects and be able to reverse engineer or reconstruct what it is that's going on in the environment. This is where signals intelligence comes into play. That in my view has,
if it's beamed like a laser beam, except it's EM or ultrasonic or whatever it might be, you've got to be right in the path of where that little coherent.
That's incorrect.
Is.
It's absolutely incorrect.
Tell me.
Well, if you have an environment that has an existing broadcast spectrum, then the beam that you're referring to would be intercepting the existing spectrum that exists. In an example, it would be a complex Wi-Fi field. So if you were to open up your Wi-Fi connection and look at all of the Wi-Fi access points, whether you can log in or not, all of those Wi-Fi fields exist all around, all the time. And so if you had the ability with signals intelligence to monitor and manage what's going on inside your house, for example, you would be able to understand variations in that environment using signals intelligence. These tools are not available to the general public. That is the only reason why, in my view, that this stuff has been allowed to go on. And it's simply because
in that configuration of it, I would agree with you. In that formulation of it, yes. But if you had directional electromagnetics by the way of very small directional parabolic antennas that were sending a very narrow, tight beam, and let's say you have 3 or 4 of those together, and they're all coming from different angles, then that's not what you're talking about. That's something else.
You're still incorrect.
How so?
The only way that you could potentially do this without detection is with wideband chirped or pulsed radar technologies that basically allow for an overriding of existing signals. And if you want to look this up, you can look up DARPA's SC2 program, which discusses the implementation of military-grade communications networks over modern telecommunications infrastructure with an emphasis on 5G. And this is where a small group can be inserted into an environment and use existing transmission spectrum to operate and control the priority of traffic so that they can literally ghost into and out of an environment and conduct operations up to and including psychological operations. But your parabolic and directed energy examples, in my view, are absolutely incorrect, simply because the entire Earth at this point is blanketed with persistent, ongoing electromagnetic fields. You can also look up evanescent fields, which deal with this notion of scalar mapping, where you're able to map in 4 dimensions: up, down, left, right, forward and backwards, and time. These are the commonly available open source intelligent types of information that you can look up to try to understand the level of surveillance that is available with signals intelligence.
Okay.
We will.
You want to entertain my idea a little bit more?
Sure.
Okay. let's take a look at this. Let's say that we have, let's just picture two laser pointers. So in perfectly clear air, if I have a red laser pointer and I'm pointing it at a target, then if the air is clear and there isn't dust floating around in it, you really can't see that coherent beam coming out of the red laser pointer as it's going through the air. You only kind of know that it existed once it hits a surface. And then you see, of course, the obligatory red dot, right? All right. So let's say that meaning would be conveyed, whatever the meaning might be, to the target, if the color of the light was not red, but was purple, let's say. All right. So now I have two laser pointers, both coming from wildly different angles apart from each other. And each of them are going through clear air. And one of them is red and the other one is blue. And everybody who's played with paint knows that when you mix red and blue, you get purple. So the meaning is conveyed by it being the purple. The purple color would be analogous to actually delivering the signal into that person's brain that you were trying to deliver. Okay, so nobody can see the red laser beam as it's going through the air. And when it gets to the target is actually inside the skull of the target individual. Nobody can see the blue laser beam as it's coming from a different angle. And if they could, it would look blue. It wouldn't look purple. Therefore, it would not have the meaning that is the ultimate meaning of the two combined. So those two coincide at some point inside the brain of the skull of the person who's the target. And at that point, they produce the color purple. So nobody sees anything. And now on top of this, there could be a third color required to get that. And now to continue to complete the analogy, this light is basically electromagnetic radiation. We can do the same thing with a maser. Maser is a microwave laser as opposed to a light laser, right? So we do this with directional microwave laser beams. And nobody sees what the information is coming down each beam. They only form the actual composite information once they combine at the target. They're both very directional, they're very tight beam, and they combine together in the target person's skull, where the meaning, let's say the voice in the skull, then is decoded. There you go.
Okay. Can you see microwaves?
Nope.
Right. And you implied that you cannot see lasers. So to round out your hypothesis here and to refute it, simply, if you were to take the sensors and the transmitters that exist on a modern phone, your phone can see all of that, whether it's directional or not, whether it's combined or not.
If it's not directed at the phone, if it's not within the phone's receptive area, then it'll go right by the phone.
You're missing the point. The point is that you have photoreceptors and you have transceivers that understand and map the environment 24 hours a day so that you can be understood, so that it understands where you walk, your gestures, what you say, what you do. These things are not available to a biological organism known as a human.
True.
The cell phone or
but
other...
But those are also scanning. They're also steerable. So they're steering around all the time. So they're actually like a spray pattern. You know what I mean? They're scanning the whole environment.
What happens is you get a continuous wave and you get pulsed waves, and these waves can be built into three-dimensional objects, a sphere, a cube, a fan, whatever. And once the environment is saturated with a continuous wave, you get femtosecond, picosecond, nanosecond, microsecond scanning. That allows for instantaneous, what we would understand as instantaneous surveillance of an entire environment. So you can theoretically understand where a point source of some type of radiation is generated from and where it's going and what it's doing, whether it's going directionally to a target or bouncing off a wall or a coffee table or anything else.
as it interferes with the other waves that are propagating through the environment and being monitored.
And
right?
This is standard phased array radar. They have what they call pencil beamforming that companies like Boeing have patented for things like Iron Dome defense, where they can use continuous wave radar and very, very narrow phased array beamforming technologies to track a supersonic missile and destroy it with directed energy. These technologies are available in your cell phone, folks. So anyway, well, great conversation, man. Because lots and lots.
One thing that's a big takeaway from your expanding upon my simple, and it was a simplified example that I came up with, is we are in an environment which is basically saturated with all sorts of waves. We don't know what they are, but the devices that are radiating them do know what they are. They know what frequencies they are. They know what direction they are sending them in. And many of them are networked together, so they know what each other is sending and receiving. So any change to that environment is going to be interpretable by way of them and the software that I'm sure at some point there's software that is characterizing it and decoding what it means. So yeah, it's a very complex bath of electromagnetic radiation that we live in now.
Yep. This patent talks about locally occurring infrasound. So this is the generation of sound waves less than 20 hertz, below what we understand as audible sound. And we're running short on time, so we'll start moving a little more quickly. Silent subliminal.
Where did the 2 hours go, man? Look at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We have 10 minutes left, guys.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Silent subliminal presentation system using non-oral carriers in the very low or very high audio frequency range, or in the adjacent ultrasonic frequency spectrum. They're frequency or amplitude modulated. Your speakers on your phone function way, way above what we can hear. And it is a normalized and standardized way for devices to communicate with each other. You can look this up. This PDF discusses microwave auditory effects and applications. It is a very, very long document. And I want to show you that it was published in 1978, and it's in the Library of Congress, catalog card number 7721499. This document gets into all kinds of interesting things: microwave radiation, auditory system, psychophysical observations, neurophysiological correlations, the interactive mechanism, a spherical model, which is what I was talking about earlier, where your organs and your head and your brain are used as resonance chamber. Thermoelastic equations of motion, which is thermo-acoustics, and on and on and on. Again, 1970s, folks. This is an extract or an excerpt from it. They talk about comparing and contrasting what happens using sound and then what happens using modulated microwave energy, direct communication of speech via the appropriate modulation of microwave energy. This was a search that I will come back to later: microwave resonance enhanced acoustics, which is this idea of putting something in your body into a resonance so that less energy is needed once a resonance is achieved with a particular component within your body to modulate or stimulate or inhibit some activity. a document, 2007, Hearing of Microwave Pulses by Humans and Animals, Effects, Mechanism, and Thresholds. Talks about bone-conducted acoustic or sound pressure waves in the audible frequency range using microwave pulses, frequency ranges of hundreds of megahertz to tens of gigahertz. And we'll continue. Microwave auditory effect and its application. There is a whole bunch of stuff in here that you can read or start searching key terms. The microwave auditory phenomenon. This is in 1980 from the IEEE, and these are abstract references. Auditory system response to RF energy. Fry or Frey. If you were to look this guy up in the patent family or in a Google documents, if you will, you'll find all kinds of stuff that this guy's worked on. He pioneered a lot of this stuff. Human auditory system response to modulated electromagnetics, hearing sensations in electric fields, microwave hearing, thermoacoustic auditory stimulation by pulsed microwaves, detection of weak electromagnetic radiation by mammalian vestibulocochlear apparatus, microwave auditory effects and applications, auditory perception of radio frequency, electromagnetic fields. The following abstracts are from NASA, microwave auditory phenomenon. So we'll move on. (2010), a novel radar sensor for no contact detection of speech. So this idea of your microphones are listening to you folks is just the tip of the iceberg. With microwave and millimeter wave technologies, they are able to sample upwards of 2,000 times per second all of the necessary components to formulate speech. Your lips, your teeth, your tongue, your throat, everything, your vocal cords. They can all be sampled within a 2,000 times per second rate to then reconstruct speech upwards of 96, I believe, % accuracy. So that you don't need a microphone to spy on people. You don't. 10 gigahertz sample was used. Again, these frequencies are now proliferated throughout all of your mobile devices. And here is a graph of what would be, I'll read it for you, spectrogram of the original traditional microphone speech, A, spectrogram of the original radar sensor, B, spectrogram of the enhanced traditional microphone speech, C, spectrogram of the enhanced radar sensor speech. And what you see here is a very, very good replication of what we understand as standardized recording mechanisms, aka a microphone, and what is now deployed in mass, which is ultra-wideband frequencies for spying on you.
In your phone.
Yeah.
In your new phone, anyway. If you have a 25-year-old phone like me, not so much.
So we won't get into the highlights of this. I've done some research on stuff like this, apparatus for audibly communicating speech using the radio frequency hearing effect, U.S. Air Force, 1996. Here's another one that I did research on.
By the way, guys, I'm adding links into the show notes as we go here.
Method and device for implementing the radio frequency hearing effect, U.S. Air Force. We will not watch this. Actually, we will. I want to show you this piece right here that breaks down the thermoacoustic effect. So pay attention.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we are proposing here. So our fingerprint reader relies on the thermoacoustic effect. And the thermoacoustic effect is essentially that we expose the tissue with microwave or optical excitation that generates small thermal expansions that give off ultrasonic waves. We intercept the ultrasonic waves and sort of reconstruct an image based on that. So with this method, we use a combination of microwaves and ultrasound. The microwave gives you contrast information, spectral information, and ultrasound gives you structural and resolution. So the combination of the two sort of gives you enough of the features that you need to reconstruct the blood vessel library that generates these low false alarm rate detections. Now, potential for thermoacoustic imaging, one thing.
We'll stop there. If you want to look more about some of the medical applications of this, just look up thermoacoustic imaging for breast cancer detection. And you will find all kinds of information about the use of thermoacoustics and the benefits of using thermoacoustics for detecting abnormal tissues in something like a breast.
Wow.
I want to show you this real quick. Actually, we don't have time. I'll save this for next show. Apple and Face ID. Photoacoustics are the same thing as thermoacoustics, but they use light instead. And what you're seeing on this person's face are emissions of light that are focused from lasers that exist in your phone to map and identify your face. And if you research into the patents, they also map the blood vessels and other components that exist underneath your skin. And just for giggles, remote non-genetic optical modulation of neuronal activity using fuzzy graphene. So if you can put this together with this, you might understand what Facebook and others are doing with their thought-to-text technologies. If you want to read more about this stuff, you can go to humaninternet.org and start looking at Google Radar and gesture sensing and brain communication and remote control. You can read about camera technologies. You can read all about Wi-Fi and ultra-wideband, directed energy systems, and some about what they can do with your power lines in your house. I think we'll round this out with this, a device for stimulating the functional state of a biological object using a UHF generator. These are the same frequencies that we have been discussing today or tonight, wherever you are. Stimulating the functional state of your biology.
What's the date on this one? 92.
1991.
Okay. Yep, 91. Okay.
A hearing aid based on microwaves. Electromagnetic wave therapy treatment. Method and device of microwave electromagnetic impact to a trespasser. A device for applying millimetric wave therapy, millimeter wave medicine, folks. A device for therapeutic action on cellular tissues of living organisms.
Could be so good.
That would be up to whether or not we preserve this country. A method for applying EHF frequencies locally with 2 or more frequencies at the same time.
Right.
And these technologies exist and persist today in your mobile devices, folks. And This is a breakdown from a Israeli patent.
I think we should revisit some of these. I think we should pick up maybe right around here next week. The second last one there, using two or more frequencies, is what touches on using the interactive effect of the two to get a result that you could never get on the target organism with just one of those frequencies. So, yeah.
So just to round out this notion of Wi-Fi and how long we have been exposed to unethical experimentation and spying for your entertainment purposes only, this talks about the effects of Wi-Fi fields on your neurologic tissues and your genes. So just be aware, folks, of what is going on around you.
Well, what do you think? Good place to reach a milestone here?
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. All right. Last words to you. Then, last words from you. Set the stage, and then I will. I'll close the show for the week, guys.
Number one, pray. Number two, help, not hurt.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. See you next week. Be well.